What's up, friends? It's Matt over here at Everproven. Hey, so today we are talking about the Concept 2 rower and specifically the drag factor on the rowing machine. If you've ever wondered what that number means or how it's different from the number on the setting on the side of the flywheel on the rower itself, you're not alone. In this quick guide, I'll explain what drag factor is, how it differs from the damper setting, and why that all matters. We'll also cover typical drag factor ranges for men and women and how to check your drag factor on the rower's monitor. Even things like how dust and temperature will affect it, we'll review that too. So let's dive in. Okay, first let's clarify the difference between the damper setting and the drag factor. The damper setting is the lever right here on the side of the flywheel labeled 1 through 10. Moving the damper changes how much air flows into the flywheel with each stroke. Essentially, it's like changing gears on a bike. The higher the damper, like closer to 10, lets more air in, making the flywheel harder to accelerate. It's like pedaling a big gear on the bicycle. It feels heavier to get going. The lower the damper, which is closer to 1, restricts air, so the flywheel spins more freely and feels lighter, especially on the first few strokes. Now, the drag factor is the actual measurement of how quickly the flywheel slows down on each recovery between strokes. In other words, the monitor is calculating the number that represents the resistance you're feeling by measuring the rate at which the flywheel decelerates after you pull. The key difference is that the damper setting controls the airflow and thus influences resistance, but the drag factor is the quantified result of resistance. Two rowing machines set at the same damper might have different drag factors if, say, one machine has dust in the flywheel or it's at a higher altitude environment. That's why coaches often say to use drag factor to get the true comparison of rowing heaviness between different ergs. So for context, on a clean, brand new Concept 2 rower, a damper at 1 might give you a drag factor of around 90, and a damper at 10 might yield roughly a drag factor of 200 to 210. So drag factor increases as you open up the damper, but remember, it's not a fixed ratio. Over time, the flywheel might get dusty or the air conditions might change, so the same damper setting will yield a different result and give you a lower drag factor reading than you would have had before. The take-home point here is that your damper setting equals the input plus your drag factor, and that'll show you your actual output in terms of resistance. Neither drag factor or damper setting by itself makes your workout harder or easier. It's really about how hard you row. You can do a light, easy row at a high drag or a killer sprint at a low drag. Intensity comes from your effort, not just the drag number. So what drag factor should you use in your workouts? Well, the answer there depends on your size, your strength, and your training goals. But we can talk typical ranges for the purposes of this video. For most adults, a comfortable drag factor tends to fall somewhere between 115 and 140. Concept 2 generally recommends new rowers start with a damper around 3 to 5, which is a mid-range, which usually produces a drag factor of roughly 100 to 140. And that would be on a well-maintained machine. The mid-range feels more like rowing on water and is a good balance of not too heavy and not too light. In a CrossFit setting, many athletes gravitate towards the higher end of that middle range. It's commonly suggested that male CrossFit athletes start using a drag factor of about 120, maybe a little bit more, like 135, while female athletes often use 110 as a starting point. Of course, these aren't strict rules, they're just ballpark figures that coaches might throw around, and they might give you feedback to change your drag factor or your damper setting as they see you moving in the gym. But stronger athletes might prefer a higher drag factor, for example. Some experienced folks and women might start around 125 to 130, and men around 135 to 140, and especially if they have the power to handle it. During shorter sprint style workouts, for example, like a 100 meter or 500 meter row for time, you'll sometimes see athletes crank the damper up to get drag factors in the 130s to 140 plus range to maximize the powerful stroke. On the other hand, for longer rows or smaller athletes, a lower drag factor in the 110s can be more efficient. The main thing to remember here is that drag factor is personal. Drag factor is more about personal preference and what gets you the best results. There's no single right number for everyone. You want a setting that allows you to maintain good form and row effectively for that given workout. Many top rowers will stay in a moderate drag range for most of their training, only going higher or lower for specific purposes. If you're not sure, err on the side of moderate drag and focus on technique. You can always experiment as you get more comfortable. Okay, so that's all well and good, and how do we actually check the drag factor on your Concept 2 rower? So finding the drag factor is actually fairly easy, and it's a pretty useful habit to get into, especially if you use different ergs or rowers around the gym. So here's how to check the drag factor on a PM5 monitor. So the first thing you're gonna do is go to this main menu, you're gonna hit more options, and then you're gonna simply hit display drag factor. So from here, make sure that you are strapped into the rower and ready to start moving, and you're gonna start rowing at your normal pressure. So like so. After a few strokes, you'll notice that the number will appear on the screen. That number is the drag factor, okay? It's for that current damper setting and the conditions of your rower. So for accuracy, you may want to start by taking a few strokes consistently at the pace or power you plan to work on in the workout that you have. So for this one example, I have a really high drag factor. I want to bring that down. So I'm going to bring it down from 10 to about 6 here. I'm going to aim for like 135 for me. And we'll see if that's where I need to be after a few strokes. Okay, so maybe a little bit higher, maybe I need to knock it down just a little bit more, but I'm in the ballpark range. So I brought it down just a little bit. Let's see where we land. Yeah, I'm about right there. All right, so that's how you figure out your drag factor based on the damper setting of your Concept 2 rower. Don't forget, you can always adjust if needed. If the drag factor number is higher or lower than you want, you just adjust the damper up or down and take a few more strokes until it falls within your target range for that particular workout you're looking to do. For example, if you check and you see a drag factor of 150, but you're aiming for about 130, you bring the damper a bit lower to that lower number, row again until you find about 130. Once you've got the drag where you want it, you can exit the menu and start your actual workout. The monitor will keep using that drag factor to calculate your distance, pace, and calories accumulated. So here's a pro tip. If you switch machines or row in different gyms, it's a good idea to quickly check the drag factor each time. One machine's damper at 5 might be doing 120 for a drag factor, while another's damper could be 130 or 110 due to dust or conditions or temperature. Taking a few seconds to view your drag factor ensures you're getting the feel you expect on each rower, and this is something that crew athletes and experienced CrossFitters do regularly in their workouts to make sure that they maintain consistency. All right, that's the lowdown on drag factor for the Concept 2 rower in a nutshell. Remember that drag factor is just the machine's way of quantifying how heavy the rowing feels by measuring the flywheel slowdown. It's influenced by the damper setting, but also things like dust and air conditions. In practice, finding the right drag factor is about balancing power and control. You want a setting where you can maintain good technique and stroke rate for the workout you're doing. For most CrossFit athletes, that means somewhere in the 110 to 140 range, with men on the higher end and women on the lower end of that spectrum. So, the next time you hop on a Concept 2 rower, take a moment to check the drag factor on the monitor. Dial in the drag that feels right for you. For a longer WOD, you might want to keep it moderate, whereas for a short piece, you might bump it up a bit. But don't fall into the trap of thinking higher is automatically better. As coaches often say, the best damper or drag setting is the one that lets you produce the best results. Focus on a smooth, powerful pull with good technique and use drag factor as a tool to fine-tune the feel of your stroke. Happy rowing, go get after it, and we'll see you soon. Take care, guys.